Hey, welcome back to Stu-Man Rides. We're out here at Chuckwalla Valley Raceway. We're going to do another instructional video, and this time we're going to talk about choosing an apex for a corner. All right, so welcome back to Stu-Man Rides. We're out here at the apex of a corner at Chuckwalla Valley Raceway, and we're going to talk about how you find the perfect apex, or the perfect apex that's right for you anyway. So first, I want to talk about exactly what is an apex, right? So it seems pretty simple, but sometimes when I ask this question in some of my schools, I get a lot of different answers. A lot of people say it's the middle of the corner, or it's the tightest part of the corner, or I don't know, something along those lines, right? So it's really pretty simple. The apex is where you choose to put your tires closest to that inside edge of the racetrack, right? So wherever your tires are going to come closest to the curbing. And it's not some fixed point, right? So what I talked about finding the perfect apex, there is no perfect apex, right? So there's the apex that's right for you and how you choose to approach that corner. But there's no like one fixed spot that is going to be the exact perfect apex for the corner. We can't like grab a tape measure, measure the corner and get a protractor and try and figure out the tangent of the angle or whatever, right? Like that, there's just no math involved here. It's all choice, right? You choose where you want to put your tires closest to that inside edge of the track. Sometimes you might choose to put your tires close to the inside edge right at that cone. And that a lot of times that'll work. Sometimes it might not be the best choice, and we're going to talk about that in a little bit. All right, so the apex is where you choose to put your tires closest to the inside edge of the track, closest to the curbing on the inside of the corner. Another way to define an apex is it's the point at which you stop entering the corner and start exiting the corner, right? So all the way up to the apex, you're kind of on corner entry. After you hit the apex, you start your corner exit. Another way to think of an apex, or another way to define it, is where you stop going towards the curb and start going away from the curb. So in most corners, when you apex, you put your tires next to that curbing only for a very short period of time. There's not too many corners where you're actually riding on the curb for any distance. When you come into this corner, you try to put your tires right next to the curbing, right near that cone, and then the moment your tires get close to the curbing, you start moving away from it, right? So you're not actually hugging the curb for any period of time. You come in, you put your tires on the cone, and then you start to go away from the cone. So let's take a look at hitting the apex from the perspective of a rider. I'm following my friend Dale here. I'm on the camera bike, Dale's in front. You'll see Dale hit the apex right by the cone and then come away from the curbing as soon as he hits that apex. So let's take a look at it at a little bit slower speed so you can get a better idea. Coming into the corner preceding the one that we were just talking about. So we're going to let the bike run wide in between these corners, and you'll notice that Dale's going to go from the outside of the track right down to the curb and then immediately start coming away from the curb as soon as he hits his apex. So it's very instantaneous. Here he's coming up on the cone, hits the apex right by the cone, and then starts to come away from the curbing as soon as he hits that apex. Now let's try and think about how do you choose where you want to apex. So a lot of people will apex near the cones, right? A lot of racetracks, they put cones out at the apex, and a lot of racetracks, those cones are in a pretty good spot. Some racetracks, they're not in a pretty good spot. Some corners on particular racetracks, they're fine, and other corners they're not. So that's actually the case here at Chuckwalla. So at Chuckwalla, the cones are placed, I believe maybe for cars. I'm not sure who originally put the marks out for these apex cones, but in some corners they're not exactly in the right spot, or at least they're not in the spot that I would choose. So you need to actually know how to find an apex on your own, because those cones may or may not work. And you need to make a decision about whether that cone is actually placed in a good spot or a bad spot. And if it's not in a good spot, then you need to choose your own spot, right? Maybe somewhere past the cone or somewhere before the cone. So choosing an apex is really determined by what you're trying to get out of that particular corner, right? If the corner like this one leads onto a straightaway, then you're trying to straighten out the exit of the corner, right? So you want a late apex. It's probably somewhere past the middle of the corner. If the corner leads into another corner in the same direction, like a double apex corner, where you want to let the bike run out a little wider between those two corners, in that first corner you may choose an earlier apex. So one rule about apexes that always holds true is if you apex the corner early, you will run wider on the exit. If you apex the corner later, you're going to run a little bit tighter on the exit, right? So if you're trying to straighten out that exit, you want a little bit later exit, later apex, so that you can go a little bit straighter and a little bit tighter coming off the corner. If you intend to run wide, you can actually apex the corner a little bit earlier, which works well in some of the double apex corners here at Chuckwalla. So when you're choosing an apex, you want to choose one that suits your purpose for that corner. So this corner that I'm standing in leads onto a pretty short straightaway. So you're trying to drive off of this corner. You want to straighten out the exit, so you're going to want to choose a later apex for it. In this case, that cone's actually in a pretty good spot. How do we know? Well, we kind of line it up. When we're coming past that cone, we want to see if we're going to head straight onto the straightaway that follows. If you apex this too early, and you look where you're pointed, you'd be pointed off the track. So, for example, if we were to apex this corner where I'm standing right here, right, if you look at your perception on the line that you'd be on, if you were to meet the curb right about here and be pointed in this direction, right, where are you headed? Pretty much straight off the track, right? You can see there's some curbing on the exit of this corner, and you're headed off the track before that curbing even starts, right? So as we walk closer to this apex, you can see how things start to line up, right? As we get closer to this apex cone, and we think about what direction the bike would be pointed, right? We're going to carry a little bit of lean angle off the corner, so it's an arc, right? It's not necessarily a perfectly straight line, but at this apex cone where I'm standing now, you're pretty much pointed down that straightaway, right? Or at least to the end of where that outside curbing ends. So this late apex in this corner works out pretty well for our intended goal, right? Our goal is straighten out the exit of the corner so we can get a good drive onto that straightaway. So choosing a later apex point does that for us. And in this case, that cone's in a pretty good spot. So now we're going to take a look at another corner where we might do things a little bit differently, right? The corner just beyond this one is a double apex corner, and in that one we might choose a different apex point. All right, so let's take a look at turn 6 here. Turn 6 right behind me is a double apex corner. There's actually two corners numbered 6 and 7 here at Chuckwalla. The first one's a pretty gradual corner, as you can see behind me. There's a kind of, I don't know if there's really a straight in between the two corners. There's a little bit of straight space, I guess you could say. It's not really much of a straight. You're kind of on an arc all the way through these two corners. And you do want to let the bike run wide after this corner, because it's actually going to set you up better for the corner that follows, right? So the corner that follows leads onto a short straight, and you're going to want to straighten out the exit just like we did in the previous corner I talked about. But this one right here, our intent is actually a little bit different. We're going to choose an apex in this corner that's going to set us up better for the corner that follows, right? The corner that follows leads onto a straightaway. We want to make the most out of that one. This one, it leads into another corner, so we're not going to drive out of this corner, right? We can't drive out of it because there's another corner right after it. So we're actually thinking about trying to straighten out the entry to this corner a little bit so that maybe we can trail brake in, keep the bike upright, brake a little deeper into the corner. But we also intentionally want to run wide coming out of this corner because that's going to set us up better for the next one. So if you look at this corner and where that cone's placed, The cone's practically, it's pretty much in the middle of the corner, judging from where I'm standing, right? So that's gonna take you off of the corner on a fairly tight line if you apex the corner at that cone, right? But that's not what we're looking for in this case, right? What we're looking for is when we come out of this corner, we want to actually let the bike run all the way to the left-hand side of the track. And we want that to happen pretty early to set us up better for the next corner. So I actually choose an apex intentionally in this corner much earlier than that cone. In fact, when I come into this corner, I'm probably apexing it somewhere in this neighborhood here, right? So I'm getting close to the curb right around here, which is what, a good 30, 40 feet before that apex cone, right? So what I'm doing is where you see where I'm standing and where that lines me up, it's sending me out to the outside edge of the track, right? But that's actually a good thing, and that's what we want in this corner, right? My intent is actually to run wide, and so I choose an early apex that allows that to happen, right? Also allows me to go a little bit straighter into the corner, and therefore I can keep the bike a little bit more upright and maybe use the brakes a little bit harder. So in this corner, that cone, I would say, is very ill-placed, and we're going to choose a different apex because of what we're trying to do to the corner. As Bradley Ward photobombs my video. So I got some of the racers out here in the morning doing some hot laps on their bicycles, checking out the track, and yeah, it's nice to have somebody visit Stewman Rides for a little cameo. Bradley Ward, everybody. Anyway, so yeah, we're going to choose an early apex in this corner well before the cone because that's our intent. We want the bike to run wide in between the two corners here. All right, so here we are entering the corner on our bicycle, just to kind of give you an idea of my intent for this line, right? So I come into the corner, I hit an early apex here. I'm kind of pointed to the outside of the corner, right? So I'm going to go wide. I'm coming away from the curb even before I get to that apex cone, right? So it's sending me out here. We got some curbing on the outside of the corner, and we're actually going to try and get pretty close to that curbing to set up this next corner, right? So that early apex put me out in this area, which is exactly where I want to be because now I got another corner coming up that's going to put me onto a short straightaway. Okay, so we chose an early apex in turn 6. It put us way out wide here at the edge of the racetrack. And now we're going to talk about where we want to apex turn 7, right? So turn 7 behind me leads on to a short straightaway. So we actually want to make sure that we straighten out the exit of that corner, right? So we're going to choose an apex later, somewhere past the middle of the corner, that's going to line us up for a good straight shot onto that straightaway that follows, right? So standing here, we look, so there's a couple easy reference points that you can pick out here, right, for your apex. You got that cone right there, and then if you look just past the cone, there's like a little mound of grass, right? It's pretty obvious, right? You got the cone, and then maybe 10, 15 feet past the cone, there's a mound of grass there, or a mound of sand with some weeds sticking out of it, whatever that is, right? So if you were stuck using the cone, right, what happens is that cone's actually a bit early, and what'll happen is if you apex at that cone, it's going to send you wide coming off the corner. You're going to carry a lot of lean angle on the exit, and you won't be able to straighten out the exit of the corner as much as you want, right? So if you just go around the racetrack and you just take it for granted that, oh, those cones are probably in a good spot, I'll use those for my apex markers, then what happens is you get stuck with whatever line the person that put that cone out there chose for you, right? Me, I'd prefer to choose my own line and see maybe I can do a little bit better job. And in this case, actually a lot better reference point for the apex is that mound of grass that's way past the cone, right? So let's look at that as we approach it. We'll take some video on the bicycle as we approach that, and we'll see if we were to apex at the cone where we're pointed. So here we are on our motorcycle. We're heading into this corner here. We're out a little bit wide, and now we're going to head towards our apex. right? So if we're going to apex at the cone here, right, here's about where the cone's at. Look where you're pointed, right? Straight off the racetrack before the curbing even starts on the exit, right? So you got some curbing on the outside of this racetrack, and if you were to apex at this cone, you would be off the racetrack before that curbing even starts, right? So this cone is pretty ill-placed. So this apex cone in this corner is pretty ill-placed. And if we're to apex at that corner, right, you look at where you're lined up, which is about that direction there, you're pretty much headed straight off the racetrack. Now let's look, just a small difference, right? We have that mound of grass that we talked about, and let's see what happens if we choose that as an apex, right? So we're coming up on that now. So here we're standing next to that mound of grass. We're pointing the camera on the angle that we would be traveling, and look, you got a nice, fairly straight line all the way to the end of the curbing on the exit of this, right? So remember, your bike's going to be leaned over a little bit on the exit. It is going to be an arc. It's not a perfectly straight line. But if you apex here, you got a lot straighter shot down that straightaway than if you apex at the cone. So this mound right here makes a pretty good reference point for where you want to apex the corner. It's a lot better than where that cone's at. Okay, so let's take a look at the two corners we were just talking about at speed on the bike. Following my friend Dale again. We're going to come through turn 5 here and head into turn 6 and 7. Those were the two we were just talking about. So coming into turn 6, early apex, well before the cone. Let the bike run out nice and wide. Second portion of the turn, apexing right near that mound that was well past that cone. We'll take a look at it at a little bit slower speed so you can get a better idea of where we're apexing these corners. So coming into turn 6 again, you'll see that I'm apexing well in advance of the cone, very early, which is going to send me out wide. So I'm apexing right about here. And there's the cone way up in the distance. I'm already coming away from the curb before I even get to the cone. Let the bike run out nice and wide. Now for the second corner here, we're going to apex at that mound past the cone. So here's our cone, and there's the mound very close to the curb there, and start to come away from it and let the bike run out to the outside edge of the track. So we'll let the video run for the rest of the lap just so you can get an idea of where we're apexing some of the other corners. We're going to come in up over the top of Crash Corner here, late apex past the cone, going over the top of the hill, another very late apex way past the cone here, probably a good 20-30 feet past that cone in turn 10 is where you want to apex to get a nice drive onto this straightaway. These two cones here place pretty well. We're going to apex pretty close to them, maybe a little bit early on this one. Going into the bowl, we're going to run an early apex to send us wide through the middle of the bowl. And then the second apex, it's really not too critical to get all the way down there. Coming in here, we're going to apex a little bit early before the cone. That's going to send us wide, set us up better for this corner where we're going to apex pretty much at the cone, maybe just a little bit before it. That's going to get us a good drive onto this straightaway. Through here, double apex, early apex in the beginning, sends you out wide. Late apex past the cone is going to get us a good drive onto the front straight. So that's a couple examples of how to choose an apex out here at Chuckwalla Valley Raceway. Hopefully you can use this to choose apexes at your own racetrack or canyon road. Remember, you want to think about what you're trying to get out of the corner, right? Do you want to maximize the exit? Are you trying to straighten out the exit? In which case you want to make sure you choose a nice late apex. Are you trying to maybe intentionally run the bike wide coming off of that corner, or maximize the entry by straightening it out, in which case you might want to choose an earlier apex. So you have a lot of options. It's totally up to you where you apex. And as I showed you, you don't need to apex near those cones. In a lot of cases, you'd be better off not using the cones as your apex reference points. Sometimes they're not exactly in the right spot. Here at Chuckwalla, these aren't the only two examples of corners where the cones are very ill placed. There's a lot of corners here at Chuckwalla where I'm either apexing well before the cone or well after the cone. And it really all depends, again, on what I'm trying to get out of that corner. So hopefully this helps you choose an apex for yourself, make some decisions about that, find some reference points that allow you to get your best line and choose your perfect apex for each corner on your racetrack. Hey, so thanks a lot for watching Stewman Rides. I hope the videos help you ride a little bit better at your next track day or race practice. If you like the video, make sure you throw up a like on YouTube. And if you want to see more of the same, subscribe to my channel and you'll get notified whenever I release a new video. So again, thanks a bunch for watching Stewman Rides.